Well, hello, Manassas.
Hello.
I am from the Midwest, and this is my first time here, and y'all have given me a lovely and warm welcome, and I'm very pleased to be here. And my story tonight begins in a pretty unusual place, which is sitting in a screening of the movie Solo, a Star Wars story. Part of the reason that's unusual is because besides Stephen and me, we may be the only people in here who saw it so far. It's very underrated. But I was sitting in a screening of Solo, and I heard a line that broke open my life for me. So let me set the scene. It's May of 2018. I, after 12 years of service, 2 years of public shaming, have been fired in a blaze of public glory as mayor of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I had been a city council member for 8 years in Minneapolis. I had been mayor for 4. I gave everything I had to the city. To this day, I am a big believer in the power of local government as a place where you can do significant good for your community, significant social change work. I have a mission in my life of enrolling white people in the work of racial equity. Local government was a great place to do that, to make that case and to make change. And I've given everything to it. And in November of 2017, I lost my bid for re-election as mayor by 600 votes. So in May of 2018, I was just, I had been lying on my back on the floor staring at the ceiling for about 5.5 months. And for about the prior 2 weeks, I had been sitting up, probably staring at the wall, heartbroken. Heartbroken about what had happened, heartbroken about what does this mean for me and where I go from here, heartbroken about what was happening in the city, because what happened in fall of 2017 was a harbinger of some of the things you saw playing out on international news in later years. I was heartbroken. So let me set another scene for you. This time we take the time machine back to 1978. I am 8 years old, about to turn 9. My father, who is an early adopter, buys the first VCR in the neighborhood. For people who don't know what VCRs are in this age of having a device in our pocket where we can watch anything we want at any time,
Right.
this was the first time in history that anybody could, in their own homes, decide what they wanted to watch and when, on television or otherwise. You could rent movies and put them in and press play and then press rewind. You could put it in and hit record and record things in real time. This was magical. And my father, like I said, my father's an early adopter. A few years later, literally the serial number on his CD player was 4.
Wow.
Okay? My father's an early adopter, so when I say the first VCR in the neighborhood, I mean by a good couple years.
Wow.
But that wasn't the only thing that he brought home with him that day. Because he also brought home a bootleg copy of Star Wars. Now keep in mind, you couldn't pull up your phone and watch the entirety of Star Wars in 1978. You couldn't see Star Wars in 1978. It was no longer in the theaters at this point. I could watch it any time I wanted. Now I had seen it first run in the theater. My father, early adopter, brought us in May of 77, me and my 2 older brothers. I was 7 years old, about to turn 8 at that time, and he brought us to the theater, in the Cooper Theater in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, for anyone who's curious. And I remember sitting in that theater watching Star Wars. I especially remember the hologramic chess set. I remember the trash, I was 7. I remember the trash compactor being very nervous. I remember Darth Vader, spoiler alert, floating away, not getting his due in the end. I was a little nervous about that and wondered what was going to happen. It didn't occur to me that a sequel was going to happen. So I had loved it, but I had not understood it in a certain way. Like I couldn't have told you what happened, except very loosely, Luke Skywalker was okay at the end. But once we had that VCR and that bootleg copy of Star Wars, I watched it. I I don't know how many times I've seen the first Star Wars movie. Maybe 500 times. Kids from the neighborhood would come over and say, hey, they just knock on the door, hey, can we watch Star Wars? Sure. You know, we had a whole movie room in the basement. Yes, sure, let's go watch Star Wars. Sometimes I just watch it on my own. Sometimes it would just be on in the background. I've seen this movie so many times. So I have to set one more scene for you, because the other thing that was happening for me in 1978, in addition to getting this VCR and seeing Star Wars whenever I wanted, which was a miracle at the time, I also started being abused by adults in my neighborhood who weren't in my family, but they were very unkind to me. I'll just put it that way. And it started around the same time. It actually went on for many years. And I thought, and I believed, and I was given reason to believe, that if I told anybody what was happening, it would put myself in jeopardy, it would put my parents in jeopardy, it would put my dog in jeopardy, everything I cared about would be in jeopardy if I talked even a minute about the fact that I was being abused, sexually abused by people, by adults in my world. I didn't tell anybody until I was 2 years sober. I got sober when I was 19. I didn't tell anybody until I was 21. It started when I was 8. It went on for a number of years. It was bleak. I've brought down the room, and I know that. I promise it gets better. Because I could have used an adult. This is the part in the after-school special where some adult figures out what's going on and comes in and helps me out. I did not have that adult. My parents were busy dealing with drama of their own. They noticed the symptoms of what was going on, like they noticed I gained a bunch of weight in a very short amount of time, but they didn't ask why that was going on. They noticed that something was up, but they also had a lot going on themselves. So I didn't have that adult. Here's what I did have. I had Hawkeye Pierce. I had Diana Prince. I'm also a big Wonder Woman fan. And I had Luke Skywalker. Because when I watched Star Wars, here's what I saw. I saw a guy in the middle of nowhere, and Minnetonka, Minnesota felt like the middle of nowhere to me at the time. It felt like the center of the universe and nowhere at the same time. He was in a desperate situation. He wanted to get out of where he was. He eventually actually found a crew of people and a bunch of friends. And he did get out of there. He left. Right? He was on Tatooine. Middle of nowhere, desert, feel the wind rushing. I was just sitting there. I could feel the sand. I could feel the wind. They're moisture farmers, for crying out loud. And he got out. And later, in the following years, I saw Return of the Jedi, and I saw something extraordinary there, too, which I also had used the VCR to watch 1,000 times, as well as seeing it 5 times in the theater. I would walk to the theater to see it. I also learned something else from Luke Skywalker. I learned that no matter what evil he saw, he understood that there was still humanity, there was still good inside the evil that he was seeing. He never for a moment acted on any doubts he ever had about Darth Vader. And he maintained that faith until the very end, and he was right. He wasn't wrong about Darth Vader. So here I am, I'm a kid, and I learned a few things from Star Wars, from Luke Skywalker. I learned that you could leave. I learned that there was redemption. And I learned that there was possibility. And for me, all of that was wrapped up in Tatooine. All of that was wrapped up in the very place where Luke started from, because that was the seat of possibility for me as a young person. As I sat there watching Star Wars over and over, the possibility of who Luke would become and what he would remember was all right there on Tatooine, even though he didn't like where he was. And that was a really important lesson for me as a young, heartbroken person. Because I did leave. Things are great. I've been healing a long time for anybody who's close. So what does that have to do with Solo, a Star Wars story? Well, in May of 2018, I, a heartbroken adult, who's been lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling for a few weeks, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces, I was sitting in the film, and there was one line, and I burst out into tears when it was said. Beckett, played by Woody Harrelson, says to Han Solo, played by Alden Ehrenreich, again, two very good performances, a very good film. Very good film. Says to him, hey, there's a gangster on Tatooine who's putting a crew together. You should go there. And that's all it took to send me right back to Tatooine. Just mention it. Now, 2018, we didn't have The Mandalorian, we didn't have Boba Fett, we hadn't spent all that time on Tatooine, which I love. We hadn't spent all that time back there. He just mentioning it and understanding that that would lead Han on the path to meeting Jabba, which would lead Han on the path to Jabba getting mad at him, which would lead Han on the path of needing to leave Tatooine with Luke and Obi-Wan and C-3PO and R2-D2. That was enough to send me back to the planet of possibility. And that's why I was crying, because I remembered something about myself, I remembered something about my life, just from that one line in that one movie. Oh, right. You can leave the bad spot you're in, you can get a crew of people and make a new life for yourself. Nothing bad that happens is irredeemable. And though they wouldn't call it this until 1981, there was hope. I had hope, and that movie is called A New Hope. So that is my Star Wars story. There's a coda, that ringing bell brings me to the coda. I wrote a story about this online for an outlet called The Mary Sue. And in the back of my mind, I thought to myself, this is a love letter to Mark Hamill and his work. I appreciate him very much. He's very active on Twitter. So I made sure that he was tagged on it when I posted it online. And he liked it. And I was like, great, he knows the story exists. That's all, that is very important to me. But a week later, I was standing in a coffee shop waiting for my order when I got a notification on my phone that Mark Hamill had tweeted to me, and I'm going to read it to you. A truly inspiring story, Betsy. I'm humbled and grateful to be a part of something that you could turn to and overcome the terrible circumstances you faced at such a tender age. Wishing you continued success, M.H. Wow. Yeah. That's when the adult in me and the 8-year-old in me and every age in between came together. I didn't even pass out. And I'm still delighted to this day. So thank you for giving me this time.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we do is after we have our feature spotlight storyteller, we just ask a couple of questions, and sometimes the audience will ask questions as well. So it's a little bit more interactive, and it makes it a little bit more personal and super fun. And just because of how you're looking, I'm going to make sure I ask you a question. So we're not up here long. We take about 2 minutes, and just to get to know our feature spotlight storyteller just a little bit better. And that is such a touching story, and it has, I think it reaches across so many people more than they realize, because I myself was not much of a Star Wars fan, but I have to say, after watching it, I was forced to watch it so I could make sure that I understood. And I had a very good friend who said, I have the movies, and brought them over so we were able to watch it together. And he was able to shed light on some things for me. And as I looked at Star Wars, I was able to see the parallels between what the various characters did. I'm sorry, I don't know all their names.
It's okay, I do.
Teamwork. So the thing is that I noticed that when one person lost out, or one person didn't have direction, so when Luke was small and he didn't know direction, he didn't have an idea of where to go, he had someone that came along and said, no, you have to stay focused, you have to have faith, and in his own way, and kept guiding him in those different directions. So as I started to look at it from other aspects, I can truly appreciate your story and the depths of it. I mean, because think about it, you're talking about how you were going through something personal and traumatic, and you were able to say, hey, I'm gonna get through this, through that. At what moment did that click for you? Because a lot of times you don't realize you're in it till you're out of it. So at what moment did you realize, hey, Luke is gonna get me through this. Tatooine is gonna get me through this. Did I even say that right?
There you go.
Yay!
I'm not sure that there's a moment that I can identify because it was such instinct. I think it was part of the reason I was so drawn to Star Wars and so drawn to that story was to be told over and over and over again, whatever you're fighting against, you can be successful. You can be a young person who successfully fights a big bad thing, which is something I was doing over and over for a long time. And the lesson of you can leave. I didn't leave until I left to go to college when I was 18. And the terrible situation I was in had calmed down a great deal for a few years before I left, but it wasn't until I left that I really knew, that I could take a sigh and I could breathe. I still couldn't handle it. I drank steadily for 2 straight years after I left, but then I got sober, and I thought, I can face anything. And I got sober in 1991, so I had a long gap between that and the prequels, but I went and saw it.
Speaking about getting through and recognizing when it was time to go and how to handle it. One of the things when you were in office, there was a very controversial murder that took place. And, and I'll have you tell them about that. But the reason why I bring it up is that when you look at Betsy on camera and dealing with those moments, I have to say, I felt you were just so graceful. I mean, having people attack you and come at you from different angles and other people coming in to your aid and saying, no, you have it wrong. Do you think that Star Wars helped to set that tone for you? Because you talk about understanding that you can leave, that you can get through this, that you're not alone. Do you think you were able to take any of that with you as you were growing up to get you through those moments?
The thing I really took with me into office was this knowing that however someone is presenting, there's a human being in there. And
True.
That people were not bringing their best selves to me. But that if I were to retaliate without my best self, I would lose something precious to me. So that I had to, and that's part of being sober too, for people who have been in recovery at all. It's just, I knew that people were rightfully upset about policing on all sides, not on all sides. It's a 360-degree view. I'm not sure anybody is happy with how things are going, including police officers, including community members, including, left, right, and center. It's not going well. And I knew that, and that as the leader, I was the figurehead in the flashpoint for that. And I had to navigate through. Marty Linsky calls leadership disappointing your own people at a pace they can absorb.
Okay.
And clearly I disappointed people a little more quickly than they could absorb it. But doing my best to never forget that whoever was presenting to me was, that there was a person in there, and that I should listen to the grief of the person and not the anger of I should listen to the anger of the person as well. But ignore the fact that they couldn't in that moment connect with my humanity and connect with theirs, because then the connection is there in the interaction. It doesn't have to go both ways for that connection to be there.
And you said something a moment ago that I thought was paramount, where you said being able to understand what they were going through so that you could process and so that you could be able to keep things from being able to escalate. And just to put things into greater perspective, this is just before George Floyd.
I lost my election in November of 2017, and George Floyd was in May of 2020. So the person who ran against me and won was the mayor during George Floyd.
Okay, and so tell us the name of the gentleman that there was an issue with, that there was an incident, I'm sorry, not issue.
There were two. Jamar Clark was shot and killed by two Minneapolis police officers in November of 2015, and then Justine Damond was shot and killed by a Minneapolis police officer in July of 2017.
Okay,
Both of them were very high profile, but for different reasons.
right,
Both were notable, and there was, after Jamar Clark was killed, there was an 18-day occupation of the grounds of the 4th Police Precinct in Minneapolis. And I had governed through that and used the principles of sort of more community-centered policing and public safety, not just policing,
right.
21st century principles of that to forge a new path. I think I was the first mayor in the country to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Which meant the people, like the business community was mad that I didn't just go out and arrest everybody, and the protesters who were out there were upset that I thought that at some point it needed to end. And understandably, everybody was upset
Right.
about it, but, and then Jamar Clark was African American, and the officers who shot him, Schwarzy and Regenberg, were white. And then in 2017, Justine Damond, a white woman from Australia, was shot and killed by a Somali police officer in the whitest, richest part of Minneapolis, where I lived. And, that was its own wellspring, because there were a bunch of white people who all of a sudden thought, wait, what's going on with policing? This is really bad. And maybe for the first time it had hit home for them. And of course you could see the stark difference between how the officer, how he was treated as a Somali immigrant, African heritage man, versus white police officers all over the country. And so those were the things that I had to govern through. And I knew in both instances that one of the benefits of being sober is that if I couldn't look myself in the eye the next morning, I had bigger problems than whether or not I was going to keep my job. Because I knew what I needed to do to keep my job, and I knew it was the wrong thing to do. I don't mean to say this in a flip way. I genuinely said to people at the time, if we don't, my goal here is to keep the city from burning down. And that's going to take stuff that will make people mad, no matter what their stance on the issue is. That will upset and disappoint people. Again, disappointing your own people at a pace they can endure. But the right thing to do is to keep the city and its people as safe as possible. And so my goal was to keep the city from burning down. And there was a friend we had a big rupture in our friendship at the time in 2015, huge rupture. We didn't talk for 7 months. And he and I have talked publicly about this, so I'm not telling tales out of school. But we made our way back to each other.
Nice.
We made our way back to each other, but we did it, him, and he will tell you this to this day, him still not understanding the decisions I made, but willing to stay in a relationship with me anyway. And me knowing he didn't understand and deciding it didn't matter, and I didn't need to be right.
That's beautiful.
But fast forward 2.5 years, we had a very frank conversation because Minneapolis did burn down,
Wow.
right? And he said, I didn't understand at the time. I thought you were speaking in hyperbole, and now I understand. And we had a really great conversation, healing conversation, I think, for both of us.
Thank you so much. So before we close out this time here, very quickly, I heard I saw a video, and one of the things that the video said was, what is one way that we can control all of the different Black people that are being killed? And someone said, make everyone get life insurance. They said because life insurance people hate to pay out. So they said if everyone was forced to get life insurance, they would make sure that they fix the problem that we're having.
The actuaries would be in charge of solving the problem?
Yes, they would make sure that it was solved and it would go away.
I've never thought about it.
I thought that was a very good point. So before we have our next storyteller come on, do we have any questions at all for Ms. Hodges? Ma'am?
Hi, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your story, and I could identify because I remember every summer my mother would take us to go see each one of those Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and so on, so on, and so on. So my question was, you had mentioned in 1981 that there was a movie that came out, something about hope, and I missed what you said, and I just wanted to ask.
Episode 4 of Star Wars, which was only called Star Wars in 1977, when it was re-released in theaters in 1981, George Lucas called it Episode 4 Star Wars: A New Hope.
Oh.
So the movie that I grew up knowing as Star Wars is people now refer to as A New Hope.
Okay. Thank you for that
Yeah,
clarification.
but that didn't happen until 1981. In 1978, when I was watching it over and over, it was just called Star Wars.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. All right.
Any other questions? Anyone would like to ask one?
I'll take one.
Yeah.
I appreciate your story because my next door neighbor growing up, huge Star
One
Wars.
second, we have one more story.
So, okay, on stage.
Welcome back to stage.
Welcome back to the stage. So, growing up, our next door neighbor was huge Star Wars, and we used to make fun of him all the time because my mom is Star Trek. Right. We were not a Star Wars family, we were a Star Trek family. And so when we would go over to his house, this man had everything, and we used to just laugh at it but appreciate it because it's just who he was. So now I know I need to go watch Star Wars. But my question is, was there anything that you took from the movies that helped you in any situation in your mayoral journey? Like a lesson you may have learned from one of the characters or anything?
Well, politics is a constant invitation to lose your integrity.
That's very true.
It's a constant invitation. There's consistent opportunities to lose your integrity. And I'd say, Emperor Palpatine is a really great object lesson for what happens if you lose your integrity over and over and over and over and over. That if you think it's okay to forget that human beings matter and that everybody's a person that's standing in front of you, even the people you don't like at all, even the people that he would say he hated, hatred can only happen when you forget another person's humanity. So, he was a really good object lesson in, having the lightning hands is awesome, but losing my entire spirit and soul in the process, less awesome. Plus for me, as I said, I knew that it wouldn't just, that the cost would be the loss of myself, and the cost of the loss of myself would be to drink. And for me as a recovering alcoholic, right, I have 32 years of sobriety today, I just have today, but up until today. Thank you. I say thank you up there. Left to my own devices, I'd be drinking right now. But losing myself that deeply means drinking. And I know what that looks like, and it's horrible. So I brought that with me. Just remembering in those moments when I'm tempted what will happen to me, but also that lesson from Luke of Luke knew that he would lose himself if he forgot that there was still good in Darth Vader. And the risk to Luke Skywalker was his own risk, and that's what Yoda is teaching him, right? The loss here is not, oh no, you'll go out and do bad things, although you will. The loss is, oh no, you will lose yourself. And once you've lost yourself, the most precious thing you have in the world is gone. Now you can come back from that, right? Darth came back from that. Anakin Skywalker came back from that. You can come back from that, but it's no fun to have to. So there was that lesson too, of just remembering everybody in front of me, including the people who oppose me, including the people who use the terrible tools they had available to them to try and thwart me and my agenda, those people, they have valuable human aspects as well.
Wonderful. We need a book. That would be the first person to say we need a book for that. The Star Wars Adventures Through Life.
Yes. Really? I wonder if somebody has written a book about it. I wonder if it's called How the Force Can Fix the World.
It's called How the Force Can Fix the World.
And I wonder, where did I see it?
So, Stephen, come on up here. Come show us how.
I wasn't going to speak again. That was such a, I don't think she even meant to tee it up. That book is right here, and Betsy helped contribute writing to it.
Yes.
Please tell
Sure.
me. I really did like the book.
Yeah, no, it's Star Wars Guide on Living. I mean, one of the things that I sort of learned as an interviewer and podcaster who was really interested in trying to understand political differences through Star Wars is like almost anybody who you talk to in politics and policy, they all love Star Wars and they all sort of see a shared sort of morality in these stories. And we all look at it and we go, yeah, like redemption is good and lashing out in anger is bad and you should try to see the best in people. But then when you turn to them and ask them about their real lives, they're like, well, not in real life. not if they're a Democrat. And so what I wanted to do in this book was talk to people from across the political spectrum, the great divide, and try to understand what we share and how stories can mediate that conversation. And Betsy contributed to that. And I don't have a question necessarily, but I just want to say in front of people, I'm just so grateful that you contributed to the book and shared your Star Wars story here today.
And I'll just say it again, Star Wars made Stephen another friend.
It's true. More friends. More friends.
So read the fabulous book. There's 2 forewords. I wrote one of them. When we were on the way to the book party, I told my brother, you might be shocked to learn, I am a Democrat. And on the way to the book party, I said who was going to be there, and that Stephen, and that the other person who wrote the foreword was going to be there. And my brother, who's very conservative, said, well, maybe they can talk some sense into you. So Stephen very kindly signed the book. We tried. And I said, and it didn't work. And I sent it to my brother.
So, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.